It's at Bar-Ilan University and president of NGO Monitor, Mr. Gerald Steinberg. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Mr. Steinberg, a lot of leaks focus on Israel and donations to specific NGOs within the country. Can you tell us a little bit more about these NGOs? Some of them were mentioned in our report.
First of all, the Soros leaks covered a vast area. Soros's empire, his philanthropic charity and political empire, spends over $700 million a year around the world. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in terms of money and what was leaked, is relatively small. It didn't really tell us much about, in terms of funding, we didn't already know, although it does update the information. Adala is one of the main recipients. There are a number of Mosawa. There are a number of organizations that were listed in those leaks that are getting large amounts of money. I believe the amount of money to Adala, for instance, was close to $2 million over the last few years. Adala is an organization, although it claims to promote the legal rights of Israeli Arabs, a lot of what they do is political advocacy, anti-Israel advocacy, promotion of demonization of Israel, war crimes allegations, using terms like racism, for instance, very frequently around the world. And that's a major problem, that it often goes unchecked. And the amount of money that they get from the Soros empire is very significant. And it has not really, although it has been known, and we published in NGO Monitor a lot of information about this a few years ago, the leaks did, in some ways, put the spotlight on this.
Now, Soros is taking a lot of heat, but is there anything wrong with actually donating to these groups?
Legally, there's probably nothing wrong. We have a very Open Society Foundation, that's the name of their framework, and we have very open frameworks in many democratic societies. There are no restrictions essentially on funding, whether from governments or from individuals, for philanthropies. In some ways, that's a real problem for democracy. When you have this scale of political activism, and the Owen Alterman in his introduction talked about left and right, but I think it goes beyond that. It's not simply left and right. It's outside the democratic process. There are no checks and balances. And I think that's the big problem here, that these organizations and the people who run them are extremely powerful. And unlike the political process where you have the courts, you have the legislature, you have the executive branch, they act as checks and balances. In the world of NGOs, we saw that recently in the case of World Vision and the indictment of a World Vision employee in Gaza for having funneled off 60%, $40 million over the last 10 years to terrorist activities. In the case of Soros, a case of which is also similar to other funding frameworks like that, the money goes for political warfare very often, and it gets funneled into the demonization, the BDS movement, things like that. And in the democratic process, we don't have a way to deal with that. And it's ironic that here we have someone who's identified with the left, who strongly opposes, and his fund opposes, capitalism, and yet it's that capitalism that enables all of this political advocacy, again, outside the democratic process. So I think it's more of a political problem, not necessarily a legal problem.
Mr. Gerald Steinberg, thank you very much for joining us this evening on this latest leak. We continue with here.